This video is sponsored by Renva Turmeric Shakes, sold on Amazon. Enjoy 3 amazingly delicious flavors: vanilla chai latte, peanut butter cup, and ginger lemon drop. Welcome to the video, the TSD Mindfulness video for teaching number 7. And teaching number 7 is about the gut field, which is part of 3 teachings under the heading of the temperamental body. I described what the temperamental body is in the last video. So the gut field. The gut field is located in the solar plexus area of your body, in your abdomen area. And the solar plexus is a complex system of nerves. It's very much associated with your lungs and your adrenal glands and the nervous system, and you're in the sympathetic nervous system. And so the sympathetic nervous system are your involuntary responses in stressful situations. And so we have these 2 parts of our nervous system. We have the parasympathetic nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system. So the sympathetic nervous system is the part that gets triggered when we sense danger, and the parasympathetic part of the nervous system is actually what calms your nervous system. So when you want to calm your nervous system, you need to do things that engage the parasympathetic nervous system. And we'll go over strategies and ways to do that in other videos. But the gut field is in relationship with the solar plexus and the nervous system, just in the way that the mental field is in relationship to your brain. So that means that the gut field is not your nerves, but it relies on your nerves to activate your body in certain ways, or relies on your nerves to relax your body in certain ways. The gut field responds in a binary way, which means 2 by 2. It responds in 2 ways. One is contentment, because everything's preserved. So you know those moments when you just feel calm, everything's okay, your nervous system is not triggered. So that's one way that the gut field presents itself. And the other way that the gut field presents itself is discomfort, because things aren't preserved, because there's certain aspects of your life that may be or are at risk for changing, right? So either content, everything's preserved, or discontent because something could change. So one of the pronounced things that your gut will react around is life and death, right? You possibly dying, someone else close to you possibly dying. And that's because that is the biggest change that could happen to you. The biggest change is you could die, or maybe someone close to you could die. It's a really concerning change that the gut will react very strongly to. The gut field is associated with instinct. And what separates instinct from thought is that thought is something that we are born with, as opposed to something that we've learned throughout our life. So a lot of, when our nervous system gets triggered, we go into an instinctual mode, right? But the gut field is also associated with things that you have learned throughout your life, and also the nervous system. That we call that conditioning. Your nervous system is conditioned to respond in certain ways in certain circumstances. So the gut field is also going to be reacting to certain things that you've learned throughout your life because of that conditioning that you have. And so what we do to soothe your gut field, to activate the parasympathetic nervous system so it can calm the sympathetic nervous system, is we use reassurance. We reassure ourselves of all that is stable, that's not changing. Because if you think about the gut really being sensitive to change, that reassurance of stability is such a good way to counteract that fear of change. Very different than the mental field. We don't use reassurance necessarily to quiet our mental field. We use more concentration on something simple, our breath, our body, and that is how we soothe our mental field. So a little bit different than the gut field. So if you have an anxiety disorder, you suffer from a lot of anxiety, you may have tried traditional mindfulness techniques and it may not have been helpful. Sometimes it is, but it may not have been helpful. And so here's why I think that is. So traditional mindfulness is so focused on the mental part of our experience and taming, quieting that mental experience. And it can be helpful if that mental experience is what's causing your anxiety. If your own thinking is causing your anxiety and you soothe your thinking, then your anxiety might go down. But your own thinking is not always what is causing your anxiety. It could be more emotional. It could be more having to do with danger and safety. And if that's the case, if you use traditional mindfulness to quiet your thinking, you're still going to have the anxiety. You might not have the thoughts running as much, but your body might still be really engaged. And so that's kind of frustrating because you still don't feel good. You've done all this mindfulness, you've quieted your thoughts, and you still feel really anxious on a physical level. So that's an example of when that traditional mindfulness is not enough. You need something more. And what's missing is that step to address specifically your physical discomfort, that nervous system discomfort. And that, once you do that, then you'll feel that real calmness. And it's a little bit different than a quiet mind type calmness. The difference is that when your nervous system is really calm, it's just it's a physical calm, just really physically just grounded and calm. And so there's different techniques for that. There's safety affirmations that we'll use to remind ourselves that we are safe. I am safe in my body. I am safe to experience my emotions. I am safe to express my emotions. And this is called a bottom up approach. So in therapy, a lot they'll use a top down approach. Well, they'll talk a lot about the thinking in hopes that that's going to calm your nervous system. That's a top down approach. But this approach is called a bottom up approach, where we are directly addressing your nervous system. And then once that's addressed and calm, then your thinking will slow down. I think for true anxiety, it's much more powerful. But some of the things that your nervous system might be involved with react to are your own emotions, right? You just the fact that you might feel an emotion starting to come up might trigger your nervous system. You might feel very unsafe. The change part is your emotional stability is changing, is threatened. Of course, physical threat is going to trigger your nervous system, but also a threat to your reputation. So that would be if somebody um, perceives you in a way that feels uncomfortable to you. Perhaps maybe they are not, they think that you aren't skilled in certain ways, and that feels like a threat to your reputation, which will, for a lot of people, trigger your nervous system. So those are just a few examples of how your nervous system might get triggered on that level. Uh, but what is most important right now to know about your gut field is that for this process to work, this TSD mindfulness process, we do need to soothe your gut field. And so, because if we don't, then it's going to be really difficult to move your consciousness into your heart, because that is the goal here, is to quiet your mental field, soothe your gut field so you can move your consciousness into your heart. If your gut field's triggered, if your nervous system is triggered, you're going to have too much anxiety to really be vulnerable and move your consciousness into your heart. So this idea of moving into these perfect relationships, what we need to tie this back to is how do the fields play a role in you moving into these perfect relationships? So the mental field definitely plays a role, and the gut field also plays a role in moving into these perfect relationships. So you might take a moment and think about, how do my nervous system responses affect my relationships? So that might be vulnerability, a time, a moment where you feel like you could move into vulnerability. Maybe your nervous system gets triggered and it stops you from moving into that vulnerability. So that will affect your relationship, right? Because that vulnerability is so important to relationships. Another way that it might affect your relationship is if you are feeling uh, like your reputation is being, there's some threat to your reputation, and you might react in a certain way. And it might be difficult to communicate in certain ways, right? So that could be a way that your nervous system plays a role in your relationships, is your ability to communicate. It affects your ability to be able to take a look and be introspective, right? When we're triggered like that, it's really hard to just sit and self-reflect and understand, which is going to affect your relationships with everything, not just with people. So that's something to start thinking about, is how does my nervous system play a role in some of these different relationships? A common one would be your relationship with food. I notice that my nervous system plays a role in my relationship with food because when I'm stressed, I eat. I eat more and I eat unhealthy, right? So your nervous system is playing a role. It's important. And so despite popular belief, the nervous system, the gut field, actually it plays a really important role in your relationships. We often want to think that it's all in our mind, that our mind plays the biggest role in our relationships, but that's not true. Our gut field also plays a very prominent role. And going back to that idea of the temperamental body, the temperamental body is what drives your inclinations and your emotional responses. Now, this is the conclusion to teaching number 7 and the end of this video for TSD mindfulness.